Hi guys, welcome back. Domain 5 Risk Management, Chapter 5.3 Explain Risk Management Process and Concept. So here we are going to see through two topics here, threat assessment and risk assessment. So before we go these topics, we just give you a small explanation what is a risk and then the formula, everything. So what you see. So risk is the possibility of a exposure to loss or danger. Risk management is the process of identifying and reducing risk to a level that is acceptable and then implementing control to maintain that level. So risk analysis helps align security objective with business objectives. This involves dealing with how to calculate risk and return on investment. Risk comes in a variety of form. Risk analysis identifies risk, eliminate the effect of potential threats, and identify ways to reduce the risk without the cost of the prevention outweighing the risk. The risk is a function of threat, vulnerabilities, and potential impact. Accessing the level of risk is often portrayed the formula. So as you guys can see, risk equal to threat into vulnerability into impact. So to determine the relative danger of an individual threat, or to measure the relative value across multiple threats to better allocate resources designated for risk mitigation, it is necessary to map the resource identified threats to each and establish a metric for comparison. The previous chapter, as we discussed before in the previous chapter, is reviewed the first step, like business impact analysis, BIA. If you guys missed that, you guys can watch in previous video. The BIA is not only a technical matter of identifying services and technology assets. It is also a business process by which the relative value of each identified asset can be determined if it is failed one or more of the CIA requirements: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The failure to meet one or more of the CIA requirements is often a sliding scale with increased severity as time passes. Keep in mind that recovery point objective RPO and recovery time objective RTO is an incident handling. Business continuity and disaster recovery must be considered when calculated risk. Okay, so let's go for the topic, threat assessment. So threat assessment is a before we discuss the risk assessment, you must consider threat assessment. Okay, so when accessing threat, consider a threat as a potential that vulnerabilities will be identified and exploited. A threat vector is the method uses to get the target. Threat vectors includes those from virus, botnet, drive-by downloads, malware, phishing attacks, and keyloggers. Analyzing threat can help the organized develop security policy and prioritize securing resource. Threat assessment are performed to determine the best approach to securing the environment against a threat or classes of threat. Threat might exist, but if an environment has no vulnerabilities, it threats. Consider the simple analogy of a hurricane. Few would argue that a hurricane represents a threat. However, now consider a home on the coast in Florida versus a home inland in the Midwest. The former is certainly vulnerable to hurricane, whereas the latter is not. Probability is the likelihood that an event will occur. In accessing risk, it is important to estimate the probability or likelihood that a threat will occur. Accessing the likelihood of occurrence of some type of threat is easier than accessing other type. For example, you can use the frequency data to estimate the probability of natural disaster. You might also be able to use MTTF, MTBF to estimate the probability of components problem. Determine the probability of attack by human threat sources is difficult. Threat sources likelihood is assessed using skill level, motivate, opportunity, and size. Vulnerability likelihood is assessed using easy of discovery, easy of exploit, awarenesses, and intrusion detection. Okay. So you guys can also see threat analyze in the previous maybe 2 or more videos before, I think. So because you can see here the threat assessment type: environmental, man-made, internal versus external. So this is the best example. So environmental, natural is very clear. So weather, storm, flooding, earthquakes, fire, etc. So man-made, human causes, flooding, fire, accidents, etc. And the internal versus origin of the threat. So normally environmental is a natural and man-made disaster such as fire, flood, hurricane, infrastructure, other unusual events. So these all are the particularly with the last category, internal versus external. So this category is this understanding the difference and overlap between natural and man-made disaster is important. Typically, a natural disaster such as a tornado is beyond an organization's control. A fire, on the other hand, can be caused by either a lightning storm or arson. Furthermore, consider the internal versus external components of the threat source. In fact, across all 4 preceding categories, the threat source can be either internal or external. The adversary might be an insider or outsider looking to cause us harm. Even accidental threats, which is most associated as being internal, can be caused externally. Structural threats are commonly internal. In today interconnected world, organizations depends on the systems of many partners and third parties that are external to the organization. Finally, even environmental threats such as fire or flood can be caused by an insider or outsider. Okay. Risk assessment. Recall that assessing risk is largely a function of threats, vulnerabilities, and impact. However, an important factor must be considered between the threat and vulnerabilities: the likelihood that a threat will occur to exploit a vulnerability. As a result, overall risk assessment consists the 5 steps. One is the identify threat, identify vulnerabilities, determine the likelihood of occurrence, determine the magnitude of impact, determine the risk. Okay. So, having already performed a threat assessment and vulnerability assessment, you must consider the likelihood that the threat identified might actually occur. To most accurately the probability of an event occurring, use a combination of estimation and historical data. Most risk analysis use a physical years to set a time limit of probability and confine proposed expenditure, budget, and depreciation. A common categorization result from likelihood assessment might be based on qualitative probability of high, medium, or low. Be sure to consider the motivations and capability of the threat source, the nature of the vulnerabilities, and the existence and effectiveness of current control to mitigate the threat. Often the 3 values are translated into numerical equivalent for use in qualitative analytic process: high 1.0, medium 0.5, low 0.1. I will show you this later on video. So the next section I will show you the different slide, so you guys can understand very easily. The response must be coupled with the likelihood determinants in the risk analysis. For example, the risk analysis might have advocated putting corrective measures in place as soon as possible for all high-level threats. Medium-level threats might require some actions plans for implementation as soon as is responsible, and low-level threat might be dealt with possible or simply accepted. By nature, risk always has the potential for negative impact. Given a particular likelihood of occurrence, organization must next determine the magnitude of the impact. A simple measures of impact can ranging from very low to very high, or from negligible impact to catastrophic impact. The size of the impact varies in terms of cost and impact on critical factors. Considering both the impact assessment and the risk assessment together best help you assess the possibility and consequence of risk even if they are realized. You can then prioritize risk based on the assessment to establish an importance ranking of most critical to least critical. Ranking risk in terms of their critically or importance is an important business function because it is provide insight into where resource might be needed to mitigate the realizations of high probability risk events. Okay. So NIST. So generally, NIST has developed the risk management framework, a set of processes for federal bodies to integrate information security and risk management into their system development life cycle. We can see here the best examples how the flow is working. Categorize system, select controls, implement control, assess controls, authorize systems, and then monitor control. So this is a flow how it works in NIST. So let's go for next slide. Quantitative and qualitative risk analysis. Quantitative and qualitative. The preceding discussed are largely qualitative because they don't attempt to assign dollar values to the risk analysis process. Quantitative, first we can see that qualitative. So qualitative risk assessment can involve brainstorm focus group survey and other similar process to determine assets what and valuation to the organizations. Uncertainty is also estimated, allowing for relative projections of qualitative risk for each threat based on the position in your risk matrix that plots the probability very low to very high and impact very low to very high. Numeric values can be assigned to each state. Very low equal to 1, low equal to, moderator equal to 3, and so on. So this is the example I'm just giving. So to perform a qualitative analysis, but because the category or subjectively assigned, the result remains qualitative. So quantitative results are generally easier for senior management to understand, but they require intensive labor to gather all related measurements and are more time consuming to determine. Qualitative measures tends to be less precise, more subjective, and more difficult in assigning direct costs for measuring ROI, return on investment, and RROI, rate of return on investment. Okay, so you can see in the formula SLE into ARO equal to ALE. We will see this more about on later on slides. So because a quantitative assessment is less subjective, the process requires assigning a value to all the various components to perform a quantitative risk assessment. an estimate of potential losses is calculated. Next, the likelihood of some unwanted event is quantified based on the threat analysis. Finally, depending on the potential loss and likelihood, the quantitative process arrives at the degree of risk. Each step relies on the concept of single loss expectancy, SLE, so annual rate of occurrence, ARO, and then annual loss expectancy. So that's what I said before. So we will see this on the later on video. So normally there's single loss expectancy. We can see here. So risk calculation. So here you can see they use this formula for the calculation risk, SLE into ARO equal to ALE. So here you can see here ALE and then SLE ARO. So ALE is the annual loss expectancy, is the expected monetary losses that can be expected for an asset from risk over a 1 year period. ALE equals the SLE times the ARO. SLE into ARO equal to yield, as you can see here. The ALE can be used directly in a cost benefit analysis. It's going back the example I will show you on the next slide. The examples you will get a clear idea about this. So use the second is SLE. SLE is a single loss expectancy. Single loss expectancy is the expected monetary losses every time risk occurs. The SLE assets values and exposure factor here. SLE equals asset value multiplied by the threat exposure factor. The exposure factor is the percent of the asset lost from a successful attack. The formula is, as you guys can see, consider an example of SLE using DOS, denial of service attack. Firewall logs indicates the organization was hit hard 1 time per month by DOS attack in each of the past 6 months. You can use this historical data to estimate that you likely will be hit 12 times per year. The information helps you calculate the SLE and the ALE. The ALE is explained in greater detail shortly. An asset is any resource that has value must be protected. Determine an asset's value can more simply mean determine the cost to replace the asset if it is lost. Simple property example fit well here. So simple property example fit well here. So but figuring asset value is not always so straightforward. Other consideration could be necessary, including the value of the asset to adversaries, the value of the assets to the organization missions, and the liability issues of if compromised. The exposure factor is the percentage of loss that a realized threat could have a contained asset. In the DOS example, imagine that 25% of business would be lost if a DOS attack succeeded. The daily sales from the website are 100,000, so the SLE would be 25,000. The possibility of certain threat is greater than that of others. Okay. So third is ARO. ARO is a annual rate of occurrence, is the estimated possibility of specific threat taking place in a 1 year time frame. The possible range of frequency values is from 0.0 to some numbers whose magnitude depends on the type and populations of threat sources. When the possibility that a DOS attack will occur is 50%, the ARO is 0.5. After you calculated the SLE, you can calculate the ALE. So this gives you the probability of event happening over a single year. Okay, let's move on next slide. This is a risk calculations. Give a small example. This is like a very good example, as you can say. So you can responsible expect the average SLE, which is equal to asset value time exposure factor EF, will be the equivalent of 1000, and that will be 7 such occurrence a year ARO. Then the ALE is $7,000. Conversely, if there is only a 10% chances of event occurrence within a year time period, ARO equals 0.1, then the ALE drops to 100. So risk response strategies. Risk management involves creating a risk registers document that details all known risks and their related mitigated strategy. Creating the risk registers involves mapping the enterprise aspected services and data sets, as well as identifying vulnerabilities in both implementations and procedure for each. Risk cannot be eliminated outright in many cases, but mitigation strategy can be integrated with the policy for users awareness training ahead of an incident. For example, you can see on the picture right side, this is a best example. The formal normally the formal risk management deals with the alignment for 4 potential response to each identified risk. So avoidance, the risk, this response to eliminate the vulnerabilities that gives risk to a particular risk. This is the most effective solution, but it often is not possible because of organizational requirements. For example, eliminate email to avoid the risk of email pony virus is an effective solution, but is not likely a realistic approach. Transference a risk or the effective of its exposure can be transferred by moving to hosted provider who assuming the responsibility for recovery and restoration. Alternatively, organizations can occurring insurance to cover the cost of equipment theft or data exposure. Mitigation. So mitigation or deterrence, you can say the risk mitigation involves reducing the likelihood or impact of risk exposures. Risk deterrence involves putting into place systems and policy to mitigate to risk by protecting against the exploitations of vulnerabilities that cannot be eliminated. Most risk management decisions focus on mitigations and deterrence, balancing cost on risk against the level of risk and mitigation that will result. And then acceptance, an organization recognize a risk, identify it, then accept it. It is sufficiently unlikely or of such limited impact that corrective controls are not warranted. Risk acceptance must be conscious choice that is documented, approved by senior administration and regularly reviewed. Okay, so risk register. Risk assessment should not be one-time event. As an organization evolves, changes is inevitable. Risk management needs to be part of a continual framework from which risk can easily be communicated and then can be continually adapted. A risk register, usually implemented as a specialized software program, cloud service, and master documents, giving organization a way to record information about the identified risk. Risk registers often include enterprise and IT related risk. With threats and vulnerabilities identified, the organizations can then implement controls to manage the risk appropriately. The next section discussed, we will see this technique. The risk register should contain the specific details about the risks, especially any residual risk the organization faces as a result of control or mitigate technique employed. Normally, common content of risk register include the few important things. One is a risk category, categorization group. Second is name and descriptions of the risk. Third is the measure of the risk through a risk score. Fourth is the impact to the organization if the risk is realized. Fifth is the likelihood of the risk being realized. Sixth is mitigation control and residual risk. The last one is contingency plans that cover what happens if the risk is realized. The risk register is strategy components of for organization. The register also helps ensure that an organization's risk tolerance and appetite is correctly aligned with the goal of the business. As a result, reporting from a risk register should be clear and understandable. The output should be available and visible across the business, including to management and senior executive responsible for strategy, budget, and operation. Okay, so next slide, supply chain. So supply chain in today's business environment, so finding organizations that need to consider just their own security and risk management process is difficult. Our global economy, combined with the importance of the internet, requires organizations to consider all the third party with whom they share data, network, and processes. Part of the risk assessment process need to include an organization's supply chains, which includes various processes related to the business that also touch those outside the organizations. For example, hiring a cleaning service for your home requires that you reconsider your risk as a home owner. So there is a few examples. So just consider the few common examples. How many different third-party organizations provide such a service? What due diligence has been performed? In each example, risk also needs to be assessed because any of these can have an impact upon organization, like software, hardware, integration services, telecommunication and data services, and hosted computing and cloud application services. So in today's connected world, consider the rapid adoptions of cloud application for email and file sharing, for example those provided by Microsoft and Google. Or think about how compute infrastructure is managed completely within the cloud through Amazon Web Service or Microsoft Azure. The idea of a shared responsible model is more relevant than ever. It is critical the organization consider the risk and understand the shared responsibility through proper assessment and process. Okay. Change management. As mentioned earlier, change is inevitable. Organizations grow and seek new opportunity. As a result, the risk assessment process need to adapt it and clean up. To embrace changes is also to embrace risk. Risk is inevitable. The proper management of risk is important. Information technology also is dynamic and constantly changing, even in lieu of a strategic shift. As a result, the risk assessment process is critical to change management. Within information technology, changes can impact the system and service provided. Change includes anything added, modified, or removed. The goal of a good change management process is to allow of change without disruption or with only minimal disruptions to the systems and services. There are three changes types are generally accepted within information technology. So one is a normal change, the change that must go through the change approval process. After approval, they go from design through operations. Replacing the HR system from one vendor within another vendor systems is an example. Second, standard. Pre-approved changes with no known low risks that follow the same process each time. Resetting a user password is an example. Third, emergency. Urgent changes that needed to be implemented as soon as possible. Many changes are proactive. Okay. Again, organizations grow and evolve, and they might continually be seeking to improve or stake out new opportunity. Change is required to achieve such goals. On the other hand, change can be reactive. Consider the requirement to patch operating system should shore up recently identified vulnerabilities. For a main organization, this process is part of normal change management procedures. In some instances, such as zero-day or high-risk vulnerabilities, patch require an emergency change. This highlights one of the most important aspects of change management related to the risk management. Any changes to a process or system potential incur additional risk. This is why, for example, patching system is first tested in a lab before production deployment. Have you ever patched your own personal systems or even installed new software that subsequently created problem? Now consider an emergency change. Why might it make sense to implement a patch in production before testing? So proper assessment might showing that the risk of not doing anything now outweighing any potential risk incurred as a result of an immediate patches. Okay. Testing. By now you should clearly see the vulnerabilities and penetration testings play an integral role in the risk assessment process. For most organizations, however, the trade-off favor testings, or at least vulnerabilities testings. In any case, the risk assessment process must be considered the potential impact and should require authorizations prior to conducting such a test. This authorization should clearly provide an overview purpose, specifying the possibility that this could cause a system disruptions. In addition, the authorization should provide enough details about the testing. Now, common details included in such signed authorization could be few important things: goal, types of assessment, tools to be used, authorized systems for testings, individual authorized to perform the work, effective dates of the test, agreed upon declarations or prerequisites, and the last one is appropriate signature of management staff with authorization. Okay. Exam preparations. Choose the best term for the risk strategy accomplished any time you take steps to reduce risk. Answer: risk mitigations. D. Answer is D. Risk mitigations. In conducting a risk analysis, if you calculate the SLE to be $5,000 and it's known there will be 5 occurrences a year, then the annual loss expectancy is, answer, A, $25,000. Okay, that's it guys for this video. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Please subscribe my channel, press the bell button to get more updates. I'll post some more practice lab later on video. Share the video to your friends if you like. Have a good day guys. Bye bye.